All right, so in this video, we're going to take our last big look at China, and we're going to look at China after World War II. Now, it's always good to start with a little bit of context. So let's go back to World War II. During World War II, the nationalists who had taken power of China and the communists united to fight Japan. Now, they had just finished with a civil war, but they realized that if either one of them was going to rule China in the end, they had to finish dealing with Japan. So they worked together to fight Japan. And the division of labor worked like this: the nationalists kind of ran the government and dealt with foreign relations. And specifically, this meant dealing with the United States, who was also fighting Japan. The communists were on the ground fighting the Japanese and helping people. So while both of these are important jobs, the nationalists kind of getting American aid and dealing with foreign powers, the communists fighting the Japanese and helping people on the ground, while they're both important, this job was the one that was more visible. And so what ends up happening is that the regular people associate the communists with winning the war. And they're seen as successful and helpful. And the nationalists were seen as like hiding in offices. So when the war was over, the nationalists and the communists go back to war. So they go back to their war, and the communists win pretty easily. That's for two reasons. One, they had popular support. The people liked them. They had popular support. The people liked them and saw them as helpful in winning the war against Japan. And they had lots of military practice by fighting the Japanese. And so the communists easily win, and this happens in 1949. And so this gives us two different Chinas. So what I'm going to continue to refer to as China becomes the People's Republic of China. The nationalists fled to Taiwan, and they call themselves the Republic of China. What's important to note is that both of them think that they are the legitimate government of China. They do not recognize each other. They basically ignore the presence of the other. The People's Republic of China considers Taiwan to be a rebellious province, and the Republic of China views the People's Republic of China as illegal usurpers of the government. But pretty much they just ignore each other's presence and everyone kind of goes on with their day, but it's not outside the realm of possibilities that they may end up going to war. Now remember, because this is all happening in the Cold War, Taiwan is supported by the United States. And that's one reason why China more or less leaves them alone. Okay, so now back in China, almost immediately, Mao Zedong, and remember there's no proper spelling of this, as long as it says Mao Zedong, you've spelt it correctly. Almost immediately, Mao starts reforming the Chinese economy and society. And a lot of these early reforms are influenced by the Soviet Union and Stalinism. So we see 5-year plans. We still see 5-year plans in China. Most of these 5-year plans are focused on heavy industry. So this is stuff that the government wants. Steel, guns, boats, electricity. This is all stuff that the government wants to buy, not consumer goods, but stuff that the government can use. We also see collectivized agriculture. Which is a failure, just like it was in the Soviet Union. It is just as successful in China, which is to say that it is not successful. But we also see a lot of laws passed towards gender equality. Over this course, we've seen how patriarchal China is, and the socialists and the communists are very, very egalitarian when it comes to the roles of gender. So a lot of things change overnight for women. So child marriages and forced marriages are abolished. Abortion is legalized. Women can initiate divorce. But maybe the most visible thing towards gender equality was that foot binding was finally abolished, which means that this was going on as late as the 1940s. And for a little while, China and the Soviet Union followed the same path, but these paths diverge in 1953 when Stalin died. And when Stalin died, the Soviet Union goes down a path of de-Stalinization. And we'll cover what this looks like in a subsequent video, but basically it loosens things up. Things become a little bit more open in the Soviet Union. Mao didn't like that. Mao continued to use Stalinism. It worked, so why change anything? But he was persuaded eventually to allow for a little opening for free speech. And this little opening for free speech is called the 100 Flowers campaign. This is in 1958. Basically, what the 100 Flowers campaign did was it allowed for criticism of the Communist Party and alternative ideas. And these are ideas that are probably going to be coming from Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism. The things that China has always looked to for guidance and alternative ideas. Now, this abruptly ended around 1960. And it's unclear why it abruptly ended, but there are a number of theories, and if we put them together, we can kind of get a full picture of why this was ended. One theory is that Mao set a trap. Mao wanted to find his political opponents. And his political opponents were the ones who were probably loudly espousing these alternative ideas. Another reason that is sometimes theorized for why the 100 Flowers campaign ended was that Mao disliked the criticism but saw the alternative ideas as good points. And so if we put these two ideas together, we see that Mao didn't like being criticized, but he did see that these were good points. Not wanting his political opponents to get credit for them, he put them in jail or had them executed so that Mao would not lose power himself. After this, China becomes more authoritarian. And we see two big important policy goals after the 100 Flowers campaign. The first one of these is the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was 1958 to 1961, and it was a big push for collective agriculture. All the farmland, all land in China was confiscated and turned into collective farms, where all the farmers work together. This failed in the Soviet Union, and it fails here. It actually produced less food. And so there were famines, artificially produced famines. Now, instead of fixing this or ending this, Mao creates a scapegoat. Mao blames sparrows for eating the seeds. But sparrows don't actually eat seeds, they eat bugs. So Mao blames the sparrows. Millions of sparrows are killed which causes an increase in the insect population. And anyone who has ever tried gardening knows that insects eat the plants. So this caused there to be even more famine as the insects ate the crops that the sparrows would have eaten. And after this, the Great Leap Forward ends. We just kind of stop doing it and forget that we were even doing it in the first place. The second policy goal is called the Cultural Revolution. And this starts in 1966 and goes until 1976 when Mao dies. What the Cultural Revolution was an attempt to reignite the, I guess we'll call it the passion of the revolution. It's been 29 years since the revolution started, not 29, 27 years. And people have grown complacent. It's normal now, it's just regular life. And so, what the Cultural Revolution does is try to get people excited and passionate about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. And the way they're going to do this is through attacking the enemies of the revolution. And so you might ask, who are the enemies of the revolution? Well, they are the educated. They're the cultural elite. They're the people who have traveled abroad. These are the people that were the enemies of the revolution. And these are the people that are going to be attacked. Now, this is a very anti-Confucian idea. Because for about 2,000 years, China has focused on education. Education is the key to advancement. But now we're going to turn that around and say that educated people are actually the enemies of the revolution. If we get rid of the educated people, then they're not going to question what the Communist Party is doing. Who is going to be doing the attacking? Young people. Young people are encouraged to attack their teachers and their elders. And again, this is an anti-Confucian idea. So if we get the young people attacking and being opposed to the idea of education, then these people, who are dubbed the Red Guards, are never going to question what the government does. And the Cultural Revolution only ends in 1976 because that's when Mao dies. So when Mao dies, his successor is a man named Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng Xiaoping is the person probably most responsible for what we now understand China to look like. Deng Xiaoping was a victim of the Cultural Revolution. He was put in jail. He was re-educated. And then he was allowed to take up his own old job. Deng does two things that are very important for understanding modern China. First, Deng opened China to the world. Mao had always isolated China. But Deng opens up China to the world and becomes part of the global economy. And he even brings in a little bit of capitalism. The other thing that Deng Xiaoping is important for, he was very afraid of popular revolutionary action. Like the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was a popular revolutionary action, and because he was a victim of it, he was afraid of those things happening in the future. So, this is why in 1989, a group of Chinese college students protesting for democratic reforms were massacred in Tiananmen Square. So they were protesting in Tiananmen Square, which is right in the middle of Beijing. And Deng Xiaoping sent tanks in to blow up the protesters. And as a result of this, China, like South Africa, was shunned by the rest of the world. And it took a lot of apologizing and a lot of economic reforms to get countries to come back to China to set up factories and build products. And it seems as if they are squandering that goodwill once again by putting the Uyghur Muslims into concentration camps in 2020 and 2021. So it seems as if China is kind of repeating these same actions that they did in 1989. So this is our last deep dive into China. We will probably come back to China and look at them briefly as we wrap things up in the next couple of videos. Our last video on the world after World War II will take us to Persia, one of the first places we looked at, and then finally to Latin America. And then we'll wrap things up with the end of the Cold War and then a look at the modern world. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.